All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started here. Thank you for joining me, everybody. This is my assessment of Russia's early performance in the Ukraine operation that's currently ongoing. I will say this, that I put this information out about a week ago to the Patreons on Discord. So if you would like to get this information more in a real-time format, definitely join us over there on the Discord channel. Okay, yeah, let's rock this. Here we go. Oh, a big shout out to all my friends in the OSINT community. That's open source intelligence, for those of you who don't know. It's basically, we're taking unclassified sources in mass and digesting the information down to something credible and usable. My big source for today wants to remain anonymous, so I will respect that. But I have other sources that I will name along the way here. So in the beginning, before the operation even begun, we watched Russia build up its forces around the borders of Ukraine, both eastern borders, southern and northern borders in Belarus, for over a year. And we began to see something interesting. There was a limitation to how fast they could move their troops. It was kind of a slow and gradual buildup, and we weren't sure why. Maybe they had the excuse that this was a war game operation. They were building up for that. And then in November of 2021, we saw a rapid buildup, but it had a cap. It had a ceiling. There was a limit to how many troops they could field outside their garrisons. And that limit appeared to be close to 100,000 troops, men on the ground, boots on the ground, with all their equipment and be resupplied, kept fed, kept warm in this past winter. That number quickly grew above 100,000, and as it did so, the movements and degradation of unit movement was measurable. So we were seeing the limit of the logistics of the entire nation of Russia's army, in this case, from the very beginning. And that is a lot of the information that we did not know. We didn't know how good is Russia at fire and maneuver on a large scale. And the answer is about 160,000 troops is all they can field outside their garrison at once. And the moment they begin maneuver, their supply chain cannot resupply in time over land. They need to capture territory, air bases, and depot areas, areas that are like green zones where they can set up supply depots to then take the next step forward and push that 160-some, 70-some thousand troops forward again. And it is this slow, methodical leapfrog effect is really what we're seeing right now in Ukraine. So first big piece of information we got, Russian logistical system is uncoordinated, inefficient, and ineffective above, say, 160,000 troops on the ground. And that goes, the Air Force is kind of a different problem, so don't think that applies to them. We will get to the Air Force in this. But first I want to say a big shout out to the United States, NATO, MI6, intelligence communities, whether it's NSA, CIA, they all got together and they actually got the intel right this time. It's nice to see the guys get a little bit of credit. They work behind the scenes very hard, guys and gals, thousands of people that collect intelligence and brief administrations and give them the information they need that they can choose to go public with. And in this case, delay the invasion of Ukraine by a couple days. Some say 7 days, maybe 5 days. But the point is the operation was delayed, further exacerbating the supply problem that they had with so many troops outside the garrison. Now, this is specifically talking about the State Department going public right before the invasion was supposed to begin, saying, hey, we're expecting a false flag attack, some kind of explosion, maybe even a chemical attack. And we did see fertilizer plants damaged and gases released in one case. We saw a vehicle-borne IED exploded in the Donbass region that was blamed on the Ukrainians. So we did see these false flag attacks, but because we were told about them right before they happened, everyone saw them for what they were, and Russia could not claim a reason for invasion, a peacekeeping region, like they were originally trying to claim. Putin originally said that these were going to be peacekeeping forces at the request of the regions in the Donbass region, right? If you guys remember that, yeah. Well, all that stuff was blown up by the State Department's announcement day after day. They repeated this for many days, saying, hey, we're expecting the invasion any moment now, and this is going to be the pretext. And they were right. So what effect did this have on the troops and stuff? Well, the troops were sitting in their vehicles on the borders, eating their supplies up, whether it was food or fuel or whatever, just to stay warm, keep the vehicles going. That stuff was supposed to be used while they were in Ukraine. That was their supplies for going into Ukraine. They were eating it before the operation had begun, which reduced the amount of supplies that they had by as many as 5 to 7 days before they actually began moving into Ukraine. So great job to the intelligence community for figuring all that out and putting it in a format that could be used by the State Department and other leaders around the world to call out this operation. This is a huge intelligence victory and a logistical victory for the United States and NATO, in my opinion, and Ukraine, of course, Ukraine. All right, so what's going on in the Russian army here? Well, there's a couple of big problems that have been in the Russian army for years. These are not new problems. The first one is ghost soldiers on the roster. This is a combination of two things, incompetence and corruption. Those two things go hand in hand with the Russian military, but especially the army. It's been very evident here lately. So what do I mean by that? Oh, just checking the time there. So whenever a soldier is in the Russian army and he serves his conscript time and then he's let out, he's not always taken off the roster list. And thus the unit appears to have a strength of so many men, but it doesn't actually have that many men. And where corruption comes in is sometimes the pay for that soldier that's no longer in the military is still paid to somebody who then keeps that money, whether it's the soldier, well, I doubt, or maybe it's the commander of the unit, who knows, but the money goes to someone, and that's the corruption part. That's the incentive to not always take these soldiers off the roster. It also could just be a mistake because they're incompetent for managing their personnel, okay? It could be that as well. It's both, is what I think. Okay, the next thing is inmate conscripts. Because of this problem of units being under strength, boots on the ground, there was in the past 12 months, just over a year now actually, more than 12 months, where Russian inmates could volunteer for conscript service. And that's not a new thing either, but that was really ramped up in 2021. And a lot of them took advantage of that. So a lot of the conscripts we're seeing right now are convicted criminals, poorly trained, if trained at all. They're just taught to, show up and salute when you're told and follow orders, right? And that's the extent of their training. Here's your Kalashnikov, go to Ukraine, comrade. It's a training exercise, a lot of them are told. And that brings me to my third point. There is a serious breakdown in communication, whether intentional or not, between the unit commanders at the top of these battalions and regiments and above, and the boots on the ground, the sergeants, the people leading the platoons. So what we've seen so far with the captured Russian soldiers is a lot of them are told that this was a training exercise and that they were doing maneuvers in Ukraine, that this wasn't an invasion, which is why they were shocked when things started blowing up around them. Now, that could be complete baloney, right? But that's what a lot of them are saying right now. And whenever you hear that from enough different sources, there's probably a kernel of truth in there somewhere. So there is a breakdown in communication, and unit leadership is uninformed between the high levels of command and the what we call deck plate levels of command in the United States Navy. And so that's part of what's going on here is the soldiers are not prepared for combat until the last minute. Then they're told, yeah, we're in a shooting war, and that shock is not good for them. And this causing some units to surrender, some reportedly without a shot being fired. So big communication problem in the ranks. All right, let's go with incomplete battalion tactical groups. This is something when I told my friends in the United States military, they didn't believe me. They could not believe this was happening. But apparently some of the battalion tactical groups, which is a microcosm of an actual battalion. This is like America uses battalion combat groups, battalion combat groups, BCGs, and they're much larger. They're self-sustaining, self-supplying, can be in the field for long periods of time. But a battalion tactical group is not designed for that at all. They're designed to go out, maybe sustain themselves for a couple days with some parts and fuel, but they need resupply early and often. And there's a lot of these all around the Ukraine border when the operation began. I saw estimates between 60 BTGs and 100 BTGs, wild variants in between those. But we know that there's a lot of these. And probably because there's so many and there's problems with the maintenance with these vehicles, a lot of the BTGs went without their signals platoons. Signals platoons are key. Like, you don't go if you don't have your signals platoons, because that's how you get told to go in the first place. The signals platoon is the long-range radio communication with command, right? Communication outside your BTG goes through the signals platoon. Well, some of these BTGs did not have these platoons at all, which means they were getting their orders from neighboring BTGs, radio them, crosstalk talking to them, or they were given the instructions beforehand with a timetable, comrade, thou shalt be at point X at this time. And so between those two types of communication, whether it's from a neighboring BTG that has a signals platoon or it's with just a timetable, they're advancing. A lot of these BTGs are advancing with just rigid orders of thou shalt accomplish these objectives by this time. There's also, we've seen as many or as few as just one artillery vehicles for each BTG, where they normally would have, a couple of different types, including, engineers and mine warfare stuff as well. And a lot of them just have, if they don't have any, they may have one, which is not enough to support a large scale operation. If you're going to advance on a position, you're going to have to have more than one artillery piece to prepare the attack. You need to have artillery in mass. It's best to have one BTG with a full strength artillery unit and a few that don't have any at all than it is to have every BTG have one artillery unit, because that makes it useless in tactical combat. So that's what we're seeing right now, is a lot of them have insufficient artillery support, and that kind of explains some of the random artillery shells we saw in the first opening days of this war, where there was just random shelling in cities and in fields, and it was like one or two, and that was it. That's because that's all that they could do quickly before they maneuvered again. Insufficient fuel supply. A lot of BTGs had one fuel truck, and normally there's more than that to support between the 30 to 40 vehicles if it's an HQ BTG. They're going to run through that fuel truck very quickly. These tanks gobble up a lot of fuel very fast, and so that's why we're seeing a lot of these trucks by the side of the road, just sitting there. They're either broke down or they're out of fuel. And then the Ukrainians come up and sabotage them. And in some cases, bring tractors and steal them, which I thought that was pretty funny. They should not do that, because they're making themselves combatants when they do that, and they might get shot. So please don't do that. Leave it there. Let the Ukraine army or resistance destroy it in place. Don't steal it with your tractor. But kudos to you for doing that. Balls on these guys. Anyway, okay, every time they come to a crossroad, these BTGs of 30 vehicles or so are splitting up. They don't have enough fuel. They don't have enough maintenance. They don't have enough artillery. They come to a crossroads. They leave a unit at the crossroads, at least one platoon, right, of their choosing, and then they continue down one path and send a smaller force down a second path, just to kind of spread out across the countryside. When they do that, they're greatly reducing their fire effectiveness, because they can't support one another when they're going in different directions for miles and miles. So they're being forced, even with all the BTGs that they're bringing in, they're being forced to use roads, and at crossroads, they're splitting their forces up for tactical reasons, right? And it's not a good tactical choice. So, down here, I kind of summarized that. I said the cause of this incomplete battalion tactical groups is due to a lack of vehicle maintenance leading up to the operation. So these vehicles were sitting in fields for months, unmanned and apparently unmaintained, sitting in the sun through summer, fall, through the winter before the crews got there, and they are in poor condition after sitting out in the elements for so long. And there's also misreporting of unit strength up the chain of command. Those ghost soldiers I talked about, we have untrained conscripts, both criminal and otherwise, and there's a breakdown in communication, like I said, between the sergeants on the ground and the command at the top of the food chain. All these problems are leading to delays in what should otherwise have been a pretty straightforward operation. We're not done. We're just getting started here. Contested airspace. God bless the Ukrainians, man. They have a decentralized airspace defense. Man pads everywhere, all over the damn place. I don't know where they got them. Maybe we gave them to them. I don't know. But everybody seems has a man pad with them. And so if they see a low-flying aircraft, they take a shot at it, and they're connecting with a lot of these shots. We're seeing helicopters and low-flying aircraft like the Su-25 all over the battlefield, especially on social media. They're sending pictures of them. So a lot of air victories are happening from the ground. There is a formal organized air defense in Ukraine, but a lot of that has been taken out. So while some mobile air defense units may remain, they certainly are not as effective as they were on day one. That's one of the first things the Russians did, and they did that correctly. Take out the air radars and the air defenses to the extent that they could. Air defense in Ukraine still exists. It's just not as effective as it was, and it's mostly now decentralized man pads taking out these aircraft. But let's talk about Russian doctrine real quick. So anytime you have an invasion, doctrine requires that you support the invasion with air-to-ground attacks. In order to do that reliably, effectively, continuously, you need to take out the air defense. That must be neutralized, which is what they did on day one, right? But they didn't do it completely, so the air defense is still capable, and that's where we're seeing the ground-to-air victories for the Ukraine. Air-to-ground operations are core to invasion success. This is another reason why we're seeing such slow approaches of the Russian army, not just because of fuel and maintenance failures and troops surrendering because they don't know what's going on. They also don't have proper air cover, so they are walking into trap after trap, ambush after ambush, convoys of vehicles, lines of vehicles being destroyed by the anti-tank rockets supplied to them by NATO countries. And the Russians were really overconfident. They really thought the Ukrainians would put up a line of defense, a show of force, if you will, and then they would fall back and then concede the field. They would concede Kyiv. The leader of Kyiv, like many other leaders around the world in history, would be on the first plane out of there and, taking as much money as he could hold and his family and, being a leader in exile the rest of his life and living very comfortably with that. Pardon me, I'm sorry about that. He didn't do that. No, he rallied the population to form a resistance, and a lot of men in the country volunteered and were given a rifle overnight, even if they weren't trained in it, and they took to the field. So the resistance in Ukraine is unexpectedly greater than anyone, even honestly myself, expected. And kudos to them for defending their country. Well done. That's very much an American value. We like to think of ourselves as armed and we'd kicked anybody's butt if they came ashore here in the mainland United States. Likelihood of that happening is very low. But we're seeing what we think how we would act in Ukraine right now. And that's really why I think us and really the rest of the world are rallying behind the people of Ukraine. They're doing a great job pushing back. Something else I need to mention about air operations over Ukraine is that with multiple planes up there, IFF may not be reliable, and that's not so much an equipment thing as it is a procedural thing. It is likely that the troops that run the mobile air defenses on the ground may not know the processes, may not know the codes because of lack of communication for that day. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong to where a friendly aircraft for the air defense unit is pinged as a hostile or an unknown. It would just come back as a non-response if the IFF didn't have a good response. And then they could possibly engage, a Russian aircraft, this multi-million-dollar whatever aircraft with their own air defense. And Russian air defense is capable. Don't Don't doubt for a second that it's not. And don't be misled by this debacle that we're seeing so far with the Russian invasion, that their missile technology is not good, because it's really good. And everybody that knows air missiles and air defense understands this. Is Russian, like the SA-300 and above, is no joke. A lot of these mobile systems are very good too. But the problem, going back to it, is identification, friend or foe. Because of the breakdown in communication, the lack of training on the enlisted or the conscript side, they're not risking it. They're not putting a lot of air assets, apparently, over the battlefield right now. And Ukraine is fighting back. There is a Ukrainian Air Force. We don't know how big it is. We don't know how many casualties they've taken. That stuff is not public at time of this recording. Maybe one day in history we'll figure all this out. But there are air battles going on over the cities of Ukraine. So that's kind of a summary of what's going on with the contested airspace and why there are limited airstrikes. And the result of all this, in terms of the air, is that the Ukrainians have freedom of movement. This is fantastic for a defense. So they can move and shuffle their forces around, because they're greatly outnumbered, to where they need to be for whenever those trucks are coming down the road. We're going to be ready for them. Now, one thing that Russia needs to do in order to turn this all around, and we're kind of already seeing this, they need to capture a major airfield in Ukraine. Undamaged, of course, but if it is damaged, they need to repair it right away. And then they can begin flying in all these supplies and kind of relieve this logistical nightmare that they're in right now. A lot of the slow approach is because, one, they're forced to use the roads, which we're about to get into, and they just don't have the logistical support to push quickly right now. But the moment they get even one major airfield, which may be happening as I'm doing this recording, right? They're going to begin to use that as a supply depot to then spider web out their logistics net and support their troops all around that airfield for, miles and miles. And once they get that first airfield, they can then leap again, take a great big step towards the next airfield. It would make sense to me that they would just go from airfield to airfield after seeing how bottled up their troops have been because of the weather, the mud, the vehicles breaking down, the running out of fuel, all that stuff. This is really going to become a logistics war, as every war is, by the way. But the logistics here have really been amplified because they've been so inept up to this point. So look for Russia capturing airfields. All right, so what's going on with the roads here? Here you can see in the center, they're forced to use the roads, having their trucks side by side, 3 wide for miles long, because whenever they get into the mud of this rather warm winter, we're going to be getting into spring here soon as well, they're just getting bogged down in the fields. Now, Russia is an all-terrain, all-season military, but because of their lack of maintenance and upkeep of these vehicles, their off-road capability has been severely limited. And I want to give credit to a person I just met recently on social media, Trent Talenko, who had an outstanding breakdown of why this is. And so these military vehicles are designed to be able to adjust the air pressure in their tires so that whenever they go over soft land, they reduce the air pressure, increasing the surface area and grip of the under-pressured tires, and then they could just move across very soft mud. Get to the other side and reinflate the tires from inside the cabin. The crew hits a button and it does it all automatically. And then they can continue on the other side of the field, right? Well, when they tried doing this, a lot of the systems failed. The air inflation system and even the rims. These are special rims on these wheels that allow this inflation technology to operate. And you can see a picture here from his Twitter page showing one rim completely just sheared off in the mud. And so that, he believes, has a lot to do with, of course, maintenance, and they let these vehicles sit in fields for months, apparently unmaintained in the sunlight, and that's taken a toll on the tires, the rubber, the rims, and the systems that normally allow these vehicles to operate off-road for long distances no longer operate reliably. They may operate on one vehicle, but not the other, and so you have these units out in fields, broke down with wheels falling off. Just like you have units on roads because they're forced to use them, but now they're out of fuel because of the supply issue. Do you see how all this comes together between maintenance and logistics? You have yourself a real nightmare for the Russian army. They need to get a new supply point in Ukraine so that they can get off these roads, and maybe even get some new vehicles in there that have been maintained. This is what it looks like when you're forced to use roads in modern warfare. Ukraine, which does have an air force that I told you about, we don't know the strength of it anymore because we don't know the losses, is decimating these columns of vehicles, absolutely wrecking them. So good job to the Ukrainians, and this is why you can lose a war to supply. If they had maintained their vehicles and they could use them off-road and spread out reliably, they wouldn't be bottled up on these roads and be easy pickings for the Ukrainian Air Force. And this is happening right now. This picture's from today. A new development that is not unexpected, but here we go. The amphibious landing looks like it is on. This is west of Sevastopol, so south of Odessa, the southern side of Ukraine in the Black Sea. Looks like is going to be the scene of the first amphibious landing from the Black Sea into Ukraine. There was already one, I believe, from the Sea of Azov. I'm not sure if they actually did that one. They had planned it. This one looks like it's going to happen. And something that the Russian Navy has already done, which is a sea crime or a crime at sea, is they have forced a civilian vessel that you see here to run ahead of them in the direction of the Odessa harbor to see if it was mined with sea mines. And it is mined. And the ship was sunk by a sea mine, killing a sailor on board. Killing a sailor on board. They were forced under threat of violence to do this, and then they did, of course, sinking, losing the vessel, and a sailor. So we're seeing crimes all over the place. Warfare is not a clean business, whether it's at sea or on land, and it's going to get really ugly. The next thing I expect to see is an amphibious landing in the vicinity of Odessa, along that shoreline. It hasn't happened yet, so we'll see how it goes when it does happen. We'll look for that. I'll give you guys an update then too. Oh, and big shout out to H.I. Sutton. This is from him, by the way. So another OSINT guy who's extremely knowledgeable in all things naval and whatnot. So, and that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching this very long rambling video. I will see you when I have more information. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.